This is a really good bead head nymph pattern. I'm going to start out with 6 or 7 or 8 wraps of lead. I'm using 0.015. I'm going to go ahead and helicopter this on that end, and we'll hold the other end while we helicopter it off. And then we're just going to shove that in behind the bead here. That's going to work out just fine. This is going to be the Sulphur Nymph. Really, it has a look a little bit like a pheasant tail. We will be using pheasant tail, but it also incorporates some wood duck as well. But it turns out to be a really nice nymph pattern. So, get our thread attached. I'm just using a nano silk again because that's just what I happen to have next to me here. We'll get that far, and what I'm going to do is I want to take some wraps behind that lead just to kind of build up a little dam or a ramp. The dam will keep that lead from sliding backwards on the hook. Speaking of which, it's a size 16 with a nice gold bead on it. I think it's a 3/32 bead. I'm not worried about covering it up. I just want to make sure that I have some good thread wraps in place. So now I'm just going to take this on back down to where the end of the hook starts, just to give myself a little thread base. That's all we're doing here, just so my material is not going over the metal of the shank of the hook, but it's going actually over this thread base, and that's going to do me just fine. With this pattern, we're going to use a wood duck feather. So we're going to pull up a few fibers here. I've already removed the fuzzy stuff off of the top here. I'm going to grab a group of those feathers. If I hold them up straight at a right angle from the shaft of the feather here, those tips will be in good alignment when I pull them off. So once I have those off, I'm going to take a little bit of the measure. I want this to be, about the length of the shank of the hook here. So that's right about here. So this is my measurement. I'm going to take those and we're going to tie them on the top with a couple of thread wraps. That gives me a chance to look at the tail. And what I often do is it's sometimes too long, so that's why I only take a couple wraps, because now I can grab the butt ends here and pull on them just a little. I don't want it much shorter, but a little bit shorter. So there we go. I'm much more happy with that. I'm going to just continue winding up towards that lead, using those butt ends of this feather to help us with our taper on the fly. So go ahead and cut that off now. We're also going to use some pheasant tail here. I've got a pheasant tail feather that's been dyed yellow, and I've already stripped off a few of those fibers. You can see the fuzzy parts, or the curlies, so they're on the end. I'm going to go ahead and take my scissors and we're going to trim those off, just so they're out of our way. Then I'm also going to look at the tips, and I'm going to cut the tips off nice and square. We're going to be tying this in by the tips. So I'm just going to go ahead and put those on the shank of the hook here. Get those locked down. I've got one. There we go. So I'm going to take this right back to where we want the abdomen on this fly to start, which is right where our tails are. Okay, I've got that in position. I'll move my thread forward now to just a little bit behind the bead. Got my hackle pliers. I'm going to attach those to this pheasant. Hold that straight up. Let's make sure that we get one good wrap right around the tail before we start traveling up the shank of the hook. So now we can go ahead and travel up. Try not to get in your hook point like I just did. Got one escapee. I got two escapees. It's okay. That's going to be just fine. I'm going to go ahead, pull that a little bit forward, and then I'm going to lock that pheasant tail down. Once I've got it locked down, I can release my hackle pliers. I'm going to make sure that that's secured down with a couple more thread wraps there. And then I'm actually going to take those butt ends. We're going to use those for a wing case, so we don't want to cut them off. What I do want to do, though, is pull them backwards because we're going to tie over the top of them, going back into the abdomen just a little bit. Not a lot, but just a little bit, just about like that. For a thorax, we're going to use some Awesome Possum, and we're going to go with a golden stone color here. I'm just going to grab myself a little bit of the stubbing. It's not going to take very much. And I'm just going to finger dub this onto the thread. And I'll tighten it. I always do as I go. But I want to take a few of those wraps going back over the base ends of those pheasant tail ends. And then we'll finish up right behind the bead there. So we've got this nice kind of plump thorax going on right there. From here, we're going to go back to this wood duck feather that we have. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut the very center of it out. And sometimes it helps to try to grab the feather as close as you can to the tips. And then stroke some of these feathers back, some of these fibers back. It's kind of like that. They'll be pretty good for you. But you want it complete. Even on one side versus the other side feather. That's kind of what we're looking for right there. I'm going to take those, I'm going to let those straddle my hook. I'm going to pinch them on either side. I'm going to take a loose wrap over the top and down around the bottom of this. And I'm not going to pull tight until I'm pulling slightly upwards and towards myself. That will just kind of help keep these guys from swinging around too far. So I've got a few thread wraps in there now. I've got this great big chunk back here. This chunk will allow me to actually pull those because I want shorter legs. So I'm just going to pull this straight back until I get to the length that I want. It's going to be right about there. So we'll go ahead and take another wrap or two, securing that wood duck. And then we will be done with that wood duck. I'm going to come in with my scissors. Give that a nice trim. So with that trimmed off, hopefully you can see those legs going about halfway down the body. And they're spread apart. They're going to spread apart a little bit more now that I'm going to take my pheasant tail butts here, the butt ends of that pheasant that we tied in earlier, and we're going to pull that over the top of the hook here to make our wing case. Once I've got that in place, I'm just going to go ahead and take a thread wrap or two to kind of lock that on down. Come back on some of these wings just a little bit, but not too much. With that, we're going to come in with our scissors, cut those button ends off as close as we can. And then we'll take some thread wraps over the top of those butt ends just to clean this up a little bit. And we will use that to just kind of tie off our thread, but also put a few more wraps on that collar. Let that go. I'll turn my vise, use the cutting thing on the other end of my whip finisher. So we're now released. We'll turn this back up, and the last thing we're going to do is we're going to put a little hard shell of UV resin on the very top of that wing case. So I've got my trusty sewing needle and my resin right here ready to go. I want to be somewhat careful here because I don't want to necessarily get any of this on those wood duck legs that we've created. And we'll just hit it with our torch, harden that up. So there you go, the Sulphur Nymph, great pattern, wonderful pattern. Make sure you tie these up. I've got this on a 16. I'll take it to an 18 or a 20 as well. I wouldn't go any bigger than the 16, but throw yourself a hook in the vise and give this one a go.